Here we are in the time period of the Gaonim. And we're going to learn about a very special Gaon today, Rav Saadia. Rav Saadia was someone who actually wrote his very own responsa, and that is his responsa that he wrote. The Rambam said about him that if not for Rav Saadia, Torah would have disappeared from Israel. So let's find out what he did that made him so crucial to Jewish continuity and the development of Jewish life and law as we know it today. The Gaonim are located in Bavel. Let's just get a closer look. There's Bavel off over here, and we know that we've talked about earlier that the two main centers of the time were Sura and Pumbedisa. So there's Sura and there's Pumbedisa, two main Torah centers at the time of the Gaonim. Often both had prominent Gaonim at their helm, and that was the situation from the 6th century until the end of the 9th century. But then, for numerous factors, there was instability amongst the Shiva in Sura. So Pumbedisa was okay, but here in Sura there was trouble. So what were they going to do about this trouble? There was no one qualified to be Rosh Hashiva. There were several suggestions tossed around, maybe move to Pumbedisa, maybe they would consolidate all into one Torah center. They tried avoiding that by appointing a new Gaon, but he actually passed away shortly after his appointment, so they were back to square one. After much deliberation, the solution was to depart from normal custom, where they always appointed a local Gaon, or at least someone from Bavel. And finally, they actually picked a youth all the way from out here, from the west of the Nile River. There was a little town called Al Fayoum in Egypt, and that is where Rav Saadia was from. He was young. He was only 42. That might sound old to you, but it's young to be the Jewish leader of the era. And they obviously didn't have many choices, but this departure custom still shows us something really, really huge about Rav Saadia himself. So what was it? To answer these questions again, a bit of perspective on this Torah scholar, we're going to have a look at some of his early history so we can see what was so amazing about Rav Saadia Gaon that made the Academy of Sura appoint him as leader. So there's just a nice little image of the Academy at Sura you can see there. So let's give a little bit of the history of Rav Saadia Gaon. He was born in Al Fayoum in west of Egypt. So you can see it there on the Nile. The year 882, you can see right there it says Fayoum, and it's to the west of the Nile River. And he lived there in his youth, and he was already considered quite a remarkable young man. When he was only 20, Rav Saadia Gaon wrote the Egrain, which is a grammar book, basically. Talks about different styles of writing, and also a little bit of some rules and ideas of poetry. So we already know that he was quite knowledgeable if he was writing about that. But there was a very important issue that Rav Saadia needed to tackle. The Karaites were a very big movement, and they were very influential in Egypt, and Rav Saadia realized that he needed to address this concern of the Karaite movement. And he wrote a lot of writings against the Karaite movement, and which obviously made them very unhappy. When he was only 23 years old, his writings were burnt by the Karaites. Now, let's just pretend, if we continue this map up here, the Nile River, so just vaguely, I know it's not completely accurate, but that would be the Mediterranean Sea over there. So after his writings are burnt, Rav Saadia decides that he's always wanted to go to Israel, so he leaves Al Fayoum and he goes to Eretz Yisrael, where he meets with an entirely different problem over here in Eretz Yisrael, and we're going to learn about that in a minute. Later on, he's going to move over here to Bavel, how'd you guess? But at the moment, we've tracked his life, starting in Egypt. Now he's moved to Eretz Yisrael, and then later on, we know he's going to move to Bavel. So let's see what Rav Saadia does. In Eretz Yisrael, things weren't very smooth either. He met with an Aram B'Meir. Aram B'Meir was a descendant of David HaMelech, so he was a very important person. And he also should have gotten on very well with Rav Saadia. After all, they were both opposed to the Karaites, so they were on the same side. Yet there was a bit of a conflict. You see, Aram B'Meir decided that he was not only Nasi, because he was descendant of Hillel and David HaMelech, he was a Gaon as well. And he decided that in order to show his authority, he was going to make his own calendar. So he calculated what Chaydesh was. That's not an accurate quote. I deserve the authority to establish the Chaydesh. That's why I wrote not a quote from Rav Meir, but that was his sentiment. That was the idea that he expressed. And he decided that he was going to make his own calendar. Now, this obviously caused huge trouble. We know Rosh Hashanah is coming up soon. If we each celebrated Rosh Hashanah on different days, imagine what that would look like. It created huge disputes. His grandfather, not the Hillel over here, but in between those, Hillel II, had sanctified every future Rosh Chodesh, as we learned about earlier in the year. And Rav Meir now kind of built upon that and says, well, I want the right to establish Rosh Chodesh. I don't want anyone else to do that. And he made his own calendar. This was a huge problem. People celebrating Yom Tov on different days. It was not, there were mistakes in his calendar. It was really big, and there really were people celebrating Yom Tov on different days. You can imagine how excited the Karaites were watching this happen. The Christians as well were probably rather bemused. And now Rav Saadia finds himself on an opposite side of the fight. And Rav Saadia says to him, please do not create strife in the community. Again, that's not an exact quote, but that's the idea. And Rav Saadia came out against him really, really strongly and wrote a sefer called Sefer Mayadin. And this was probably part of why he was appointed as the Gaonim in Surah, because of this incredible achievement. So there's the Sefer Mayadin. Then he wrote. And because of the strength Rav Saadia showed in dealing with this situation, he was later appointed as Rav in Surah. Okay, so we talked about the Egrain, and we talked about Sefer Mayadin. So which of these fit the description of responsa? So just a quick reminder, and the question is going to come next. Responsa, again, were responses to difficult matters in the Gemara. So the idea was that they were applying the Jewish law, the ideas, into practical cases. So which one of these? Now Rav Saadia is in Israel, and he's going to move on from Israel to Bavel, as we talked about a drop earlier. So David ben Zakkai chose him as the Reish Kalisa because he was strong enough to revitalize the Gaonim in Surah. But David ben Zakkai did not actually realize what he was getting himself into. We're going to look more on that later about the strength and the clash between the two. For now, what you need to know is that Rav Saadia Gaon, we wrote the Sefer Mayadin, we talked about that earlier, he took up the position of being Gaon in Surah at the age of 46. He was only 46 years old. Now that might sound old to you, but that was actually very young for someone to be the leader of the Jewish nation in Surah.